Hi everyone, welcome to the channel. Today we are going to be sewing this beautiful top right here. This is actually called an under-bust corset, although I made a little bit changes. I added a peplum to it at the side, and then I also used a skin net for the yoke, and I think it's really beautiful. I actually got this style from here, but I made few changes to it. So this is a fabric that I used for this top. I also sewed the skirts, but I will not be showing that into this video. So for just the top, I used about 2 to 2.5 yards of fabric. And then right here, I have a plain piece of paper that I placed on fold. So I have gone ahead to mark my bust line, my chest line, my under bust, and my waistline. So if you have your bust line, just minus 2 inches from it, you have your chest line measurement. So after marking the waistline, I'll mark my hip line measurements. So you measure from your waistline down to your hip. Whatever you get, you mark it there. Mine is 8.5 inches away from my waistline. So after that, on the top line, I'm going to be marking half of my shoulder measurements. My shoulder measurement is actually 14. When I divide it by 2, I have 7 inches. So after connecting it to the chest line, I'm going to go down by 1 inch from that point. And I'll mark 3 inches also at that point, and I'll connect it. This is the shoulder for this top. Then from here, I'll divide this line by 2, and I'll go in by 0.5 inch. And on the chest line, I'm going to be marking quarter of my bust measurement. So after doing that, I'm just going to use a French curve and connect it like so. So with this now, we have the armhole for the top. And then for the neckline, I'll go down by 3 inches. You can go down by 4 inches, or just depends on how low you want it. And then take note how I place my French curve. I make sure that I shape the neckline very well so that it will fit perfectly well around my neck. So after that, on the bust line, I'll mark half of my bust span measurements, which is the nipple to nipple measurements. So after marking it, I'll just connect it all the way down to the hip line. But then I'm going to mark like 2 inches away from the hip line. I will not draw it all the way to the exact hip line point. So from here now, I will divide this line by 2. That is my shoulder. I will divide it by 2. And then I'll connect it all the way down to the bust line, like so. So after connecting, the next thing we're going to do is to place the darts for this top. So I'm using 1 inch darts. So that means I'm marking 0.5 inch on both sides of the line. While on the under bust line, I will still mark that same 0.5 inch on both sides. And I'll also add 0.25 inches extra on both sides. That means we'll have 0.75 on both sides when you join it together. The reason why I'm doing this is because I'm tightening that under bust area. It's very important you tighten the under bust area, especially when you are sewing an under bust corset. So when you connect it all the way to the hip line, you are going to go down by 1 inch from the bust line measurements. And then with a French curve, you connect it down to the under bust, like so. So at this point now, I'll just go up by 1 inch. This is where I want the yoke to start from, and I want it to be a straight yoke. You can curve it if you want. So on this point now, I'm just going to be marking the same 0.75 we have on the under bust on both sides. I'll be marking it on this point as well. So that means the total dart will now be 1.5 inches. That is 0.75 plus 0.75 is 1.5 inches. So now I'm just going to connect it all the way to the shoulder, like so. When you're done, the next thing we are going to do is we are going to be replacing that 1.5 inch dart that we marked on the chest line, starting from that bust measurement. While on the waistline, I'm going to be marking quarter of my waist measurements plus the dart that we have there, which is 1 inch. While on the under bust, I'm going to be marking quarter of my round bust measurements, that is round under bust measurement, plus the 1.5-inch dart that we have there. So after that, I'm just going to connect it like so. And then on the hip line, I'll mark quarter of my hip measurements. Since there's no dart there, I'm just going to connect it directly to the waistline point. So the next thing we are going to do is I'm going to use a French curve, and I'll mark 5 inches below the waistline, and I'll connect it like so. And this is what you're going to have, and just go ahead and cut it off. Pay attention to the lines I'm following while cutting. So since the paper is on fold, when you open it up, this is what it should look like. The center front is also going to look like so. And then you continue cutting the remaining part of it as shown. So for the bust area, by the time you open it up, this is what it should look like as well. While for the yoke, I'm just going to go ahead to remove the darts at that yoke point. So just open it up like so, and then when you open it up, you're just going to close the darts. And then we're going to be creating the asymmetric design that we have on the yoke. So to do that, I'll be using a French curve to just connect it all the way to the other end of the yoke, that is the armhole area. I'll connect from that shoulder point down. The parts that we just cut off will be used as the nets for the top, while the up parts will be the Ankara. And then this is me just labeling everything so that I will not be confused when I'm cutting it. And yeah, we're going to place that on the pattern, and we'll cut exactly what we have there. So for the back, I'm going to be marking my chest line and my waistline measurements alongside my hip line. And after that, I'll mark half of my shoulder measurement on the top line, and I'll connect it to the chest line. So from there, I'll mark 3 inches, which is a standard measurement, and then 1 inches, which is also a standard measurement. I'll connect it, and this will be the shoulder. So from the shoulder, I'm going to divide that line by 2, and I'll connect it to the chest line, and that will be the armhole for the back. So on the chest line, I'll divide my bust measurement by 4, and I'll mark it there. While on the waistline, I'll divide my waist measurement by 4, and I'll mark it there. I'll just connect it all the way to the waistline. And then I'm also adding 1.5-inch sewing allowance, or 1 inch, depending on the allowance that you want to use for the top. And then for the hip line, I'll divide my hip measurement by 4, and I'll add the sewing allowance as well. Take note, while I was drafting the front, I did not add any sewing allowance, but I added sewing allowance for the back. That means when I'm cutting, I'll add for the front, but I will not add for the back. So I've also gone ahead to mark my neckline, which is 1 inch, 1.5 inch below the top line, and I'll connect using a French curve. So from this point now, I'll be using a French curve to connect it from the side seam all the way to the center back. So after connecting, I'm going to mark 5 inches below the waistline, and that will be the hemline for the top. So after cutting it out, the next thing to do now is we are going to try as much as possible to remove bulkiness from the back of this top. So to do that, I'm just going to be marking my back waist length measurement, which is 15.75 inches, whereas my front waistline measurement is 16.5. So that means the back is shorter than the front. So I'm just going to be removing the excess from the back pattern. Just the excess is about 0.6 inches. So that means I'm marking 0.3 on both sides of it, and I'll connect it like so. And then we'll just slash it open, and then you close the excess using the tape rule. And with this, we are going to place it on the pattern and we are going to cut. So I've gone ahead to cut for the fronts, and pay attention, I cut using 1/2 inch sewing allowance to all sides, but for the side fronts I used 1/2 inch on some of the parts, whereas I did not add allowance on the armhole, but for the side I added my sewing allowance, which I did not add while cutting, while the other part I added 1/2 inch. For the yoke, I did not add to the armhole. I added to the down part all the way to the other side, and to the neckline alongside to the shoulder. For the side front, I went ahead to cut 2 pieces. One piece for the left side and then the other piece for the right. While for the center front, I have only just 1 piece, like so. So I've also gone ahead to cut lining for all this. For the yoke, I'm cutting 1 piece for the main fabric and then the other piece for the lining. I'm using the main Ankara as the lining for the yoke. So right now, I'm just going to place the side front to the center front. I'll pin it down and I will sew using 1/2 inch sewing allowance. While for the down part, I've also gone ahead to cut and I added sewing allowance to the necessary points. But for the side fronts, I added 1 inch sewing allowance. Remember, whatever I'm using for the upside, I'm using for the down. So now I'm just going to be joining the center front to the side front, just like we did for the bust area. I'm doing the same thing here, and this is what we have. So by the time we are done joining, this is what we have. At this point, I went ahead to pad the bust area before I joined everything, but I did not pad the sewing allowance so that we can be able to turn it with the lining. For every other part of the bust area, I padded it. And then now I'm just going to be joining the bust area to the down parts, making sure that I'm aligning the dart line of the bust to the dart line of the down part of the top. For the yoke, I'm going to be placing the lining on the main fabric and I'll sew using 1/2 inch sewing allowance. While for the net, I've also gone ahead to cut it, and then I added sewing allowance to the necessary points aside the armhole area. So after joining the fabric to the lining, when you notch it and you turn it to the right side, this is what it should look like. So for the net, I'm going ahead to join 2 pieces of net together because I feel 1 piece is too light for me. So I used 2 pieces of nets, and then I joined it using 1/2 inch sewing allowance. So now I'm just going to be joining the net to the Ankara fabric, and I'll be joining it at the points that we cut out while drafting the pattern. So I'll just pin it down all the way to the upside. I'll take it to the sewing machine and I'll sew using 1/2 inch sewing allowance. So after sewing, you turn it to the right side, you should have something like this. And then after sewing, you are going to be folding it in like so on the other side. But before then, I've gone ahead to sew it. Before I join it to the other side, I'm just going to be cutting off the excess allowance at that point so that it will not be showing on the front side by the time we are done sewing. So by the time I'm done joining, cutting off the excess allowance, I will join it to the other side as well. but this time around I'll be sewing it on the front. So I'll just pin it down and I'll sew on top of the net. So after sewing, this is what we have, right? At this point, I will cut off the excess at the other part of the nets as well, just like we did for the first one. So just cut off the excess and I'm going to open it up as much as I can. And this is what we have. So from here now, I have this bias tape. This is a decorative bias. And I'll just fold it in like so, and I'll align it to the net part of this yoke. Just pay attention to how I did it, and I believe you'll be able to recreate it as well. So when I'm done, I'll just sew on it like so, using a matching thread, please. And then after that, I will just join the yoke to the down part of the top using 1/2 inch sewing allowance. So by the time you're done sewing, this is what it should look like. And then now I've also joined the lining of the down part of the top. So now I'm just going to be joining the lining to the fabric like so, using 1/2 inch sewing allowance. And then at this point also, I added that decorative bias to the underbust area for just decoration. And then also the next thing, I'm just going to be turning the lining with the fabric using 0.25 inch sewing allowance, so that we'll have a clean finish by the time we are done. So for the back, I've also gone ahead to cut the back pattern, and I added zipper allowance, which is 1 inch. I added allowance to the shoulder, but every other part I did not add allowance apart from the down parts, because I added it while drafting the pattern. So I've also gone ahead to cut the lining for it, and I'll join the lining to the fabric and I'll sew at the neckline and also at the zipper area. So by the time I'm done sewing, and I'll turn it to the right side, iron it, and then I'll turn it back to the wrong side and I'll sew closing the lining to the fabric like so. So I've done that for the front, and I used, through the armhole, I was able to turn it to the right side. So it's at this point that I decided to just add a peplum to this top. I wanted to sew a gown, but I decided to add a peplum to it so that I'll sew a top. And then I just traced it like so. I went up by 1 inch, and then using a French curve, I just traced what I want, the shape of the top that I want, and then I cut like so. So I'm going to do the same thing for the back as well. I went up by 1 inch, just like I did in front at that side seam area. So after that, I will just connect it using a French curve. So make sure the side seam of the front is the same length with the side seam of the back, so that you'll be able to join it. So I'll just use the French curve and connect it like so. So by the time I'm done, I'm going to be joining the back to the front at the side seam. So whatever allowance you left, you are going to use that allowance to sew. You can even measure it to make sure that you are sewing exactly what you need. And then now I'm done joining it at that side seam area. So from here, from that point down is 6 inches. So I'm going to be marking that 6 inches on the front part of the top, like I'm measuring. I don't have a measuring tape right now, that's why I'm using a ruler. And if you can see, I'm struggling to mark 6 inches on that point. So I've marked the 6 inches there, and I also marked the 6 inches at the back. So now I will use a tape rule and measure from that 6 inches from front on the front side to the 6 inches on the back, and I got 5 inches. The next thing, now I've gone ahead to cut another piece of fabric, which is 20 by 20 on both sides. I'm about to cut the peplum for this top, and that's why I'm folding it into 4 pieces like so. You know, whenever you're cutting a full circle, you're going to fold it into 4 pieces. So at this point now, I'm just going to divide that 5 inches that we got by 6. 6 is a standard measurement. Whenever you want to cut a full circle, you divide your width by 6 inches. So I've divided it and I got 0.9 something inches, and I've marked that. I just marked the 0.9 inches there. Why? For the length of this peplum, I want it to be the same as my hip line measurement, which is 8.5. That is the distance from my waist to my hip line is 8.5. So I'm marking 8.5 plus extra 1 inch sewing allowance. So that means I'm marking 9.5 inches as the length of this top. So from this point, I'm just going to open up one part of the peplum like so, and then from here I'm going to be marking that 6 inches that we got while from the pattern. I'm going to mark it plus 1 inches extra. That means I'm marking 7 inches on this part that is opened. The 1 inch is for sewing allowance. So when I mark 7 inches, I'll just cut off the remaining excess like so. That means one part of the peplum is shorter than the other part. I've gone ahead to cut the lining as well, and I'll join it at the down part and turn it to the right side, and this is what we have. So the part that is shorter now, I'll be attaching it to these points and I'll be sewing on it. You can use 1/2 inch sewing allowance to just join it, join the peplum to join the full circle to the top. So just pay attention to how I'm joining it. The shorter parts, I'm joining it to the front and to the back, while the longer parts, I'll be joining it to the side seam of the top. If there are any excess, just split it. After pinning, you're going to join it using 1/2 inch sewing allowance, and then after that you're going to be joining it at the shoulder for both the front and the back. You join the front to the back at the shoulder for both sides, and then you're going to add a zipper to this top and an open end zip, and also you are going to be joining a basic sleeve to it. And that will be all for today's video. If you did enjoy the video, please give it a thumbs up, subscribe to the channel if you haven't, and thank you so much for watching this video.